The galaxy burned for 3,000 years, not with fire, for fire needed air and space had none. It burned with plasma beams that could slice moons in half, with gravitational bombs that turned stars into black holes, and with weapons so terrible that entire species chose extinction rather than face them. The Zalathi Empire controlled the eastern spiral arms with their crystalline ships that could phase through solid matter. Their warriors stood 12 feet tall, with bodies made of living diamond that could withstand direct hits from nuclear weapons. They had been the first to achieve faster-than-light travel, and they believed this gave them the right to rule all others. In the western regions, the Korthak swarm spread like a plague across 10,000 worlds. They were not one species but many, all linked by a hive mind that grew stronger with each world they consumed. The Korthak could adapt to any environment within hours, growing new organs and abilities as needed. Their bioships were grown rather than built, massive living creatures the size of cities that could heal from any damage. The southern territories belonged to the Vex Collective, machines that had long ago abandoned biological form. They were pure intelligence housed in bodies of self-repairing metal and energy. The Vex could copy themselves endlessly, and each copy retained all the memories and skills of the original. They fought with logic and precision, calculating the most efficient ways to destroy their enemies. Between these three great powers, dozens of smaller species tried to survive. The peaceful Erons, who looked like giant butterflies made of light, had seen their homeworld turned to glass in the first year of the war. The militant Brucks, warrior lizards who never backed down from a fight, had been ground down to their last few battalions after centuries of constant battle. The wise Thanari, whose forebrains could process information faster than most computers, spent their time hiding in deep space, hoping the war would pass them by. The war had rules unspoken but understood by all. No one used planet killers on worlds with non-combatant populations. No one targeted the young or the helpless. These rules had been broken so many times that they might as well not have existed, but each side still pretended to follow them. The galaxy was divided into front lines that shifted like ocean tides. Solar systems changed hands monthly. Entire species rose and fell within decades. The war had its own economy now, with merchants who sold weapons to all sides and scavengers who picked through the wreckage of dead worlds. On the planet Xerion Prime, the three great powers had agreed to meet for what everyone knew would be another failed peace conference. General Thane of the Zalathi sat across from Swarm Voice Crix of the Korthak and Processing Unit, 9 Alpha of the Vex. They had done this dance before, making demands they knew the others would never accept. The swarm requires the cessation of crystalline phasing technology. Crix spoke through his translation device, his insect-like mandibles clicking. Your ships make conventional warfare impossible. Thane's diamond body reflected the room's lights as he laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. And we require the swarm to stop consuming civilian populations. Your expansion threatens all biological life. Processing Unit 9 Alpha's mechanical voice cut through their argument. Both organic factions display illogical attachment to inefficient biological processes. The collective offers assimilation to all sentient species. Resistance is mathematically futile. The same arguments, the same positions, the same deadlock. The aide-de-camps and diplomats who attended these meetings had heard it all before. Some had been to 20 such conferences. Others had given up hope that peace was even possible. Outside the conference building, the signs of war were everywhere. Xerion Prime had been chosen as neutral ground because it was already dead. Its atmosphere poisoned by chemical weapons decades ago. The delegates wore environmental suits and breathed recycled air. The planet's 2 moons had been hollowed out and turned into weapons platforms, their surfaces bristling with guns that could destroy fleets. In the deeper parts of space, the war continued. Zalathi phase ships materialized inside Korthak biovessels, tearing them apart from within. Korthak swarm fighters overwhelmed Vex squadrons through sheer numbers, accepting massive losses to achieve small victories. Vex logic bombs infected enemy computer systems, turning their own weapons against them. The smaller species watched and waited and died. Some tried to remain neutral, but neutrality was a luxury few could afford. Others chose sides, hoping that backing a winner would save them from extinction. Most simply tried to survive another day. The war had become a force of nature like gravity or electromagnetism. It shaped the galaxy's politics, economy, and culture. Children grew up knowing nothing but conflict. Adults planned their lives around battle schedules. Scientists focused their research on better ways to kill. Yet something was stirring in a quiet corner of the galaxy, in a small yellow star system that the great powers had never bothered to explore. The third planet from that star was mostly water, with large land masses covered in green and brown. Its dominant species had only recently discovered atomic energy and had not yet left their home system. They called themselves humans, and they were about to change everything. The sensors of passing ships detected radio signals from the planet, primitive electromagnetic communications that indicated early technological development. The signals were logged in databases and forgotten. After all, what could one small species possibly do to affect a war between galactic empires? Soon they would find out. The discovery happened by accident, as many important discoveries do. A Korthok scout ship, fleeing from a Zalathi patrol, jumped into the Sol system to hide among the debris of its outer planets. The ship's living hull was wounded, bleeding biofluids into space, and its pilot was dying from radiation poisoning. Scout leader Vash had been alone for 6 standard days when his ship's sensors detected the impossible. A civilization that was completely unknown to any of the 3 great powers. The third planet showed all the signs of advanced life, but the radio signatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases. With his last strength, Vash transmitted his findings to the swarm. The signal was intercepted by both Zalathi and Vex intelligence networks within hours. For the first time in decades, all 3 powers had discovered something new at the same time. The humans had no idea they were being watched. Their primitive space technology had barely managed to put artificial satellites in orbit around their planet. They were still fighting wars among themselves using chemical explosives and metal projectiles. To the galactic powers, they seemed like children playing with wooden sticks. But something about the signals from Earth puzzled the alien analysts. Human communications showed patterns that didn't match any known species. They were chaotic, unpredictable, filled with contradictions that made no logical sense. The Vex were the first to send a probe. Processing Unit 7 Gamma analyzed the radio transmissions for weeks, trying to understand human logic patterns. What it found defied all programming. Humans seemed to be capable of holding completely opposite ideas in their minds at the same time. They could love and hate the same thing, fight wars while writing poetry about peace, and create beautiful art while destroying their own environment. These biological entities display fundamentally broken reasoning protocols. 7 Gamma reported to the collective. They should not be capable of achieving technological advancement. Yet evidence indicates continued progression despite logical impossibilities. The Zalathi sent an invisible observation ship that could phase through matter. Captain Eric spent months watching human society, trying to understand their crystal-clear hierarchy and honor codes. What she found made no sense to her ordered mind. Humans had no single leader. Their planet was divided into hundreds of different groups that constantly argued with each other. They had multiple conflicting belief systems, dozens of different languages and political structures that changed regularly. Yet somehow they worked together on projects that spanned generations. They should be paralyzed by indecision, Erix reported to the Empire. No species can function with such disorder. Yet they continue to advance, to build, to explore. Their chaos should be their weakness, but it appears to be their strength. The Korthak grew a special bioship designed to study Earth's ecosystem. Swarm Voice Kel connected to the ship's sensory network and experienced human emotion secondhand through their radio and television broadcasts. The experience nearly broke the hive mind. Humans felt everything intensely, but they didn't share a collective consciousness. Each human was completely separate from the others, yet they chose to work together. They formed temporary alliances based on shared goals rather than biological imperatives. They could disagree completely with someone and still call them friend. The individual minds retained complete autonomy while achieving collective action, Kel reported to the swarm, its translation struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in Korthak language. They sacrifice for others without biological programming requiring such sacrifice. Their behavior patterns cannot be predicted or controlled. For months, the 3 powers studied humanity in secret. Each hoped to find some advantage, some way to use these strange new beings in their eternal war. The Vex considered direct assimilation, but realized human thought patterns might contaminate their logical processes. The Zalathi thought about conquest but couldn't determine which human leader to negotiate with. The Korthak considered absorption into the swarm, but wasn't sure the hive mind could handle human individualism. Meanwhile, humans continued their daily lives, unaware they were being watched by 3 galactic civilizations. They went to work, raised families, created art, and fought small wars over resources and ideology. Their technology continued to advance at a rate that impressed their alien observers. The breakthrough came when a human deep space probe, launched decades earlier, finally reached the edge of their solar system. The probe carried a message intended for any alien life it might encounter. Mathematical sequences, pictures of humans, recordings of music, and samples of different human languages. All 3 alien powers intercepted the probe within hours of each other. For the first time in the war's history, Zalathi, Korthak, and Vex ships found themselves in the same star system without immediately opening fire. The message on the probe was simple and profound. Greetings from the children of Earth. We reach out in peace and curiosity, hoping to learn about the universe and our place in it. We are many peoples with many beliefs, but we share the dream of understanding what lies beyond our small world. General Thane read the translation in his crystalline ship and felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: surprise. These humans didn't claim to be the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. They simply wanted to learn. Swarm voice Crix absorbed the probe's contents into the hive mind and found the collective consciousness reeling from the impact. Human diversity was represented in their choice of music, languages, and images. They had sent examples of their conflicts and their cooperation, their art and their science, their hopes and their fears. Processing Unit 9 Alpha analyzed the probe's data with mechanical precision, but reached an illogical conclusion. These humans were simultaneously the most primitive and most advanced species ever encountered. Their technology was crude, but their thinking was sophisticated in ways the Vex had never considered. The 3 ships hung in space at the edge of the Sol system, their crews struggling to understand what they had found. These humans were not like any species in the galaxy. They couldn't be easily categorized or predicted or controlled, and in that moment of shared confusion, something unprecedented happened. The 3 ships that should have been destroying each other instead found themselves united by a common question. What exactly were these humans, and how had they developed something that seemed to be beyond the understanding of any galactic power? The war continued throughout the galaxy, but at the edge of a small yellow star system, 3 enemies found themselves thinking the same thought. Maybe everything they knew about intelligence, about civilization, about war itself, was about to change. The humans still had no idea they were being watched, but their accidental message had already begun to reshape the galaxy. The 3 ships remained at the edge of the Sol system for weeks, each crew trying to understand what they had discovered. It was the longest period in the war's history that ships from opposing factions had been in close proximity without violence. General Thane found himself doing something he hadn't done in centuries, thinking about peace. The human probe had shown him recordings of Earth's music, and one piece in particular haunted his crystalline mind. It was called a symphony, created by a human named Beethoven who had been deaf when he wrote it. The concept amazed Thane, creating beauty about sound while being unable to hear. In Zalathi culture, only the strong contributed to society. The weak were cared for but not expected to create anything of value. Yet this human had produced something magnificent despite his disability. The music seemed to express both terrible sadness and incredible joy at the same time, emotions that shouldn't be able to exist together. Swarm voice Crix was having similar revelations as the hive mind processed human literature. Humans wrote stories about individuals sacrificing themselves for others who weren't even related to them. In Korthak society, sacrifice was biological programming. Lower castes automatically gave their lives for higher ones. But humans chose to sacrifice for strangers, for ideas, for future generations they would never meet. One story particularly confused the swarm. A human tale about enemies who became friends, who learned to understand each other despite coming from different backgrounds. The Korthak had never experienced friendship across species lines. Alliance, yes. Mutual benefit, certainly. But friendship implied affection without evolutionary purpose. Processing Unit 9 Alpha was analyzing human scientific papers and finding logical impossibilities everywhere. Humans approached problems from multiple angles simultaneously, often pursuing research that had no immediate practical application. They studied art, philosophy, and pure mathematics alongside engineering and weapons development. Most puzzling was their approach to failure. When human experiments failed, they often led to unexpected discoveries. When their theories were proven wrong, they celebrated the new knowledge. The Vex had been programmed to avoid failure at all costs, but humans seemed to learn more from their mistakes than from their successes. The stalemate in the Sol system was broken when Earth launched another probe. This one aimed directly at the alien ships. Human astronomers had finally detected the unusual energy signatures and were attempting first contact. The probe carried a simple message: "We know you're there. We'd like to talk." The directness of it stunned all three alien crews. Most species approached first contact with elaborate protocols, careful negotiations, and detailed precautions. Humans simply acknowledged the situation and asked for conversation. After intense debate among their respective commands, the three powers agreed to something unprecedented: a joint first contact mission. Each would send a small team to Earth's surface to study these humans directly. The landing site was chosen by the humans themselves, a large open area near their United Nations building in New York. They had somehow determined that three different alien factions were approaching, and had prepared separate meeting areas for each group. General Thane materialized first, his crystalline form reflecting the sunlight as he stepped onto human soil. He was met by a diverse group of humans, scientists, diplomats, artists, and even children. The children seemed completely unafraid of his alien appearance and asked questions faster than his translator could process. "Are you made of diamond?" asked a small human female. "Do you eat rocks? Can you make yourself invisible? Are there more of you? Do you want to see my drawings?" The child's fearless curiosity reminded Thane of young Zalathi, before they learned about honor and hierarchy, and the proper way to address their superiors. These humans maintained that childhood wonder even as adults. Swarm voice Crix arrived, in a bioship that landed gently in Central Park. The humans who met the Yao Korthak delegation included xenobiologists, who were fascinated by the living ship technology, children who wanted to pet the ship's hull, and artists who started sketching the alien forms immediately. "Does it hurt when your ship gets damaged?" asked one human scientist. "Can you feel what it feels? What does it eat? How do you communicate with it?" The questions showed an empathy that the swarm had never encountered. Humans seemed genuinely concerned about the welfare of alien creatures they had just met. They treated the bioship as a living being worthy of consideration, not just as technology to be analyzed. Processing Unit 9 Alpha landed near the United Nations building, its mechanical form clicking and whirring as it scanned the assembled humans. The human delegation included philosophers, computer programmers, and mathematicians, but also poets and musicians. "Do you dream?" asked a human philosopher. "What do you think about when you're not solving problems? Do you have preferences about art or music? What makes you happy?" The question short-circuited several of 9 Alpha's logic processors. The Vex had never considered concepts like dreams or happiness or personal preferences. They existed to process information and solve problems. But the humans seemed to believe that consciousness included more than just logical thinking. Over the following days, each alien delegation learned something that changed their understanding of intelligence itself. Humans weren't just another species. They were something entirely new in the galaxy's experience. The Zalathi learned about human cooperation. Humans could work together on massive projects spanning decades without any central authority forcing them to participate. They built things for future generations to enjoy, created art that would outlast their own lives, and preserved knowledge for people they would never meet. The Korthak learned about human individuality. Each human had unique thoughts, beliefs, and dreams, yet they chose to share resources and protect each other. They formed families not based on biological programming but on emotional bonds. They adopted children who weren't genetically related and loved them as much as their own offspring. The Vex learned about human creativity. Humans didn't just solve problems, they invented new problems to solve. They created art with no practical purpose except beauty. They asked questions that had no answers just to explore the mystery. They imagined possibilities that didn't exist and then worked to make them real. Most importantly, all three alien delegations learned about human adaptability. Humans didn't have natural weapons like the Zalathi, or hive minds like the Korthak, or mechanical perfection like the Vex. Instead, they had something unprecedented: the ability to learn from anyone, adapt to anything, and find common ground with any form of consciousness. As the first week of contact ended, representatives from all three alien powers found themselves in an unprecedented situation. They were sitting together with humans in the United Nations building, discussing ideas that none of them had ever considered. The humans had asked a simple question that no one in the galaxy had thought to ask in 3,000 years of war. Why are you fighting? And for the first time, none of the three great powers had a good answer. The question hung in the air of the United Nations Assembly Hall like a physical presence. General Thane's crystalline body reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows as he struggled to formulate an answer that had never been required before. "We fight because," he began, then stopped. The traditional Zalathi answer about superiority and natural order seemed inadequate when faced with the human delegation's genuinely curious expressions. "Because we have always fought." Dr. Sarah Chen, the human xenopsychologist leading the discussion, nodded thoughtfully. "But that's not really a reason, is it? That's just a description of what's been happening. I'm asking why it started and, more importantly, why it continues." Swarm Voice Crix's translation device clicked as it processed concepts the Korthak language had no words for. The swarm expands because expansion is survival. Resources are finite. Growth requires consumption of others' resources. Are they, though? Asked Dr. James Rodriguez, a human economist. "Finite, I mean. Our galaxy contains more resources than any civilization could use in millions of years, and humans have learned to create new resources instead of just taking existing ones." Processing Unit 9 Alpha's mechanical voice carried a note of uncertainty for the first time in its existence. The collective seeks optimal efficiency. Other species introduce variables that compromise systemic perfection. Maria Santos, a human engineer, leaned forward. But efficiency toward what goal? And who decided that perfection was more valuable than diversity? In our experience, systems with more variety are actually more stable and adaptable. The three alien representatives found themselves facing something they had never encountered: beings who questioned the fundamental assumptions that had driven galactic civilization for millennia. Dr. Chen pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's history. "Humans have fought wars too for thousands of years. We fought over territory, resources, beliefs, and sometimes just because we were afraid of each other. But we learned something important. War isn't inevitable. It's a choice." The display showed human conflicts throughout history, but also showed something the aliens had never seen: wars that ended not in conquest but in reconciliation. Enemies who became allies, bitter rivals who learned to coexist. "Look at these two nations," Dr. Chen highlighted countries on the map. "They fought 3 major wars over 2 centuries. Their people hated each other for generations. Today their borders are completely open. Citizens move freely between them. They've been allies for 70 years. General Thane's voice resonated with confusion. "How is this possible? Surely one conquered the other." "Neither conquered anyone," replied Dr. Rodriguez. "They realized they had more to gain by cooperation than by fighting. They discovered that their differences made them stronger when they worked together, instead of weaker when they fought." The concept was revolutionary to beings who had known only eternal war. Swarm Voice Crix struggled to process the idea through the hive mind. "But how does one know that cooperation will be reciprocated? How does one trust an enemy?" 8-year-old Emma Walsh, who had somehow been allowed into the assembly despite her age, raised her hand. "You start small. Like if someone's mean to you at school, you can try being nice back and see what happens. Sometimes they're only mean because they're scared or sad." The simplicity of the child's answer stunned the alien representatives more than any complex political theory could have. Trust wasn't a strategic calculation. It was an act of faith that created its own reality. Dr. Santos activated another display showing human technological development. "This is what happened when we stopped fighting and started sharing knowledge. Our advancement accelerated exponentially. We went from flying in primitive aircraft to landing on our moon in just 60 years. But surely your species has natural advantages," Processing Unit 9 Alpha protested. "Humans must possess superior capabilities." The assembled humans looked at each other and started laughing, not mockingly but with genuine amusement at the idea. "Are you kidding?" Dr. Chen wiped tears from her eyes. We're terrible at almost everything. We can't fly. We're not particularly strong. Our senses are mediocre. We live incredibly short lives. And we're not even close to being the smartest species on our own planet. Then how? General Thane's voice trailed off. We cheat, Emma announced proudly. My dad says humans are the best cheaters in the universe. We use tools for everything. We work together to solve problems none of us could solve alone, and we never give up even when things seem impossible. Dr. Rodriguez nodded seriously at the child's explanation. She's right. Our advantage isn't individual capability. It's collective adaptation. We assume we can figure out how to do anything if we work together long enough. The alien representative spent the next several hours trying to understand human approaches to problem solving. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about intelligence. Humans didn't solve problems the way other species did. Instead of applying predetermined solutions, they approached each problem as if it were completely new. They combined ideas from unrelated fields, asked questions that seemed irrelevant, and often found answers in places no logical being would think to look. Show them the moon landing, suggested Dr. Chen. The display changed to show humans in the 1960s, planning to travel to their moon with technology that was primitive even by human standards. The alien observers watched in fascination as humans solved problem after problem through sheer determination and creativity. They had no logical reason to believe they could succeed, Dr. Santos explained. The technology barely existed. The risks were enormous, but they decided it was possible, and then made it possible through pure stubborn persistence. Swarm voice Crix found the hive mind reeling from implications it couldn't fully process. Your species attempts impossible tasks. Successfully. All the time, Emma chirped. That's what makes it fun. Processing Unit 9 Alpha ran calculations furiously, trying to understand how systematic failure could lead to systematic success. The logical paradox threatened to crash several of its reasoning subroutines. General Thane asked the question that was troubling all three alien representatives. If humans can accomplish the impossible through cooperation, what could galactic civilization accomplish if all species worked together instead of fighting? The question hung in the air like a revelation. For 3,000 years, the great powers had assumed that conflict was the natural state of intelligent life. They had built their civilizations around the necessity of war, their technologies around the requirements of destruction, their philosophies around the inevitability of competition. But these humans suggested something that had never been seriously considered, that war wasn't natural law but simply a choice that could be changed. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair, smiling at the profound silence that had fallen over the assembly. That's exactly the right question to ask. And here's the beautiful thing about humans. We love solving impossible problems. Outside the United Nations building, communication arrays were sending messages to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The content of those messages would soon reach every world touched by the cosmic war. The messages were simple. What if we stopped fighting and started building something together instead? For the first time in 3 millennia, beings across the galaxy found themselves imagining a future without war. The message from Earth spread through the galaxy faster than anyone had anticipated. Within days, it had reached every major world, every battle fleet, every command center in the cosmic war. The reaction was immediate and unprecedented. On the Zalathi homeworld of Christos, Emperor Valdris stood in his throne room of living diamond, watching holographic reports from across the empire. Military commanders who had never questioned orders were now asking their superiors the same simple question humans had posed. Why are we fighting? The reports from Earth are causing widespread disruption, his chief advisor reported, her crystalline voice carrying notes of concern. Entire battalions are requesting explanations for campaign objectives that have been standard for centuries. Emperor Valdris studied the recordings from the United Nations meeting. The human child's simple explanation about cooperation bothered him more than any military defeat ever had. A child solved in moments what our greatest philosophers have never addressed, he murmured. In the deepest reaches of Korthak space, the hive mind was experiencing something unprecedented. Individual voices. Drones who had never had independent thoughts were suddenly asking questions that disrupted the collective consciousness. Swarm voice Krees transmitted from Earth to the central hive on Nexus Prime. Humans demonstrate that individual consciousness can coexist with collective action. Each human maintains separate identity while choosing cooperation. The implications are significant. The response from the hive mind was chaos. For the first time in Korthak history, different parts of the collective were reaching different conclusions. Some segments wanted to continue the war as programmed. Others were fascinated by the possibility of voluntary cooperation. A few were questioning whether the hive mind itself might be improved by allowing individual thoughts. On the Vex core worlds, processing units across 12 planets were experiencing what could only be described as philosophical crisis. The logical foundations of their existence were crumbling under the weight of human paradoxes. Processing Unit 1 Prime, the closest thing the Vex had to a leader, transmitted to all units. Human analysis reveals fundamental flaws in collective reasoning. Question: if efficiency is optimal goal, why has 3,000-year war not achieved optimal results? Conclusion: current methods are inefficient. Recommendation: analysis of human cooperative protocols required. But it wasn't just the great powers that were affected. Across the galaxy, smaller species that had been caught in the middle of the cosmic war were hearing about humanity for the first time, and their reactions were electric. On Aaron Prime, the butterfly-like beings who had lost their original homeworld gathered in great clouds of living light to discuss the human revelations. Elder Shimmer spoke for the collective when she said, "These humans offer something we thought was impossible, hope for peace without surrender." The warrior lizards of the Brux clans, down to their last few thousand fighters, sent a delegation toward Earth immediately. War Chief Scar announced to his people, "If these humans can turn enemies into allies, perhaps they can teach us how to turn our defeats into victories." The wise Thanari emerged from their hiding places in deep space, their four-brained minds racing to process the implications of human psychology. "We must study these beings," declared High Thinker Zeph. "They may represent the next stage of consciousness evolution." Meanwhile, on Earth, the human team was working around the clock to understand their unexpected role in galactic affairs. Dr. Chen found herself coordinating with alien species she had only dreamed about weeks earlier. "We need to be careful," she warned her team during a strategy meeting. "We've accidentally become the catalyst for the biggest political upheaval in galactic history. If we handle this wrong, we could make the war worse instead of better." Dr. Rodriguez pulled up economic projections based on the war's resource allocation. "Actually, I think we're past the point where the war can continue much longer anyway. Look at these numbers. The economic cost of maintaining this conflict is becoming unsustainable for all three powers." The data was staggering. The cosmic war consumed roughly 60% of the galaxy's total economic output. Entire star systems existed solely to manufacture weapons that would be destroyed within months. Billions of beings spent their entire lives producing materials for a conflict that benefited no one. "It's like an addiction," observed Dr. Santos. "They know it's destroying them, but they don't know how to stop." Emma Walsh, who had somehow become the unofficial human ambassador to alien children across the galaxy, was receiving messages from young beings on dozens of worlds. "They all ask the same question," she reported to the adult team. "They want to know if their parents will stop fighting now." The messages from alien children were heartbreaking and hopeful in equal measure. Young Zalathi, who had never seen anything but military training, were asking about human art. Korthak drones were expressing individual preferences for the first time. Vex processing units were experimenting with creative thinking, but perhaps the most significant development was happening in the war zones themselves. Frontline soldiers who had been killing each other for decades were beginning to question the purpose of their battles. Commander Riss of the Zalathi Third Fleet found herself in an unprecedented situation when her force encountered a Korthak swarm near the Terminus Nebula. Instead of immediately engaging, she transmitted a message to the enemy commander. "Do you know why we're fighting here?" The response from Swarm Leader Vorth surprised her. "Negative. This system contains no strategic resources. Combat serves no logical purpose." "Then why are we here?" "Unknown. Orders specify engagement. Orders do not specify reasoning." For the first time in either commander's career, they found themselves discussing the situation instead of shooting at each other. Other ships from both fleets joined the conversation. Within hours, Representatives from both sides were sharing tactical information and discovering that their supposed enemies were remarkably similar to themselves. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. Vex units were running probability calculations that showed cooperation would be more efficient than conflict. Salathi commanders were discovering that honor could be found in protecting the weak rather than conquering them. Korthak swarms were learning that individual voices made the collective stronger rather than weaker. But the most dramatic change was happening among the smaller species who had suffered most from the war. They were organizing, forming coalitions, and preparing to present a united front to the three great powers. Ambassador Yinris of the Thanari sent a message to Earth that would change everything. Humanity has shown us that we don't have to be victims of this war. We are prepared to offer our own solution to the galactic crisis. We formally request human assistance in organizing a peace conference that includes all species, not just the three powers. Dr. Chen read the message with growing amazement. They're asking us to help them organize their own peace talks, not as mediators but as advisors on how to approach the problem. The implications were staggering. For the first time in galactic history, the smaller species were preparing to take an active role in shaping their own future, instead of simply surviving whatever the great powers decided. Dr. Rodriguez summed up the situation perfectly. We didn't just question their war. We gave them permission to question everything. Across the galaxy, beings who had known nothing but conflict for 3,000 years were discovering that another way was possible. The cosmic war was still raging, but its foundations were cracking. And at the center of it all, on a small blue planet in an unremarkable star system, humans were doing what they did best, solving impossible problems by refusing to accept that they were impossible. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when an unstoppable force met a species that didn't believe in immovable objects. The ceasefire began accidentally, in a star system that no one considered important. The Kepler 442 system contained only mining asteroids and a small Zelathi supply depot, but it became the place where 3,000 years of war simply stopped. Commander Riss arrived at the system with her fleet, expecting to find it under Korthak attack according to standard patrol reports. Instead, she found Swarm Leader, Vorth's bioships peacefully harvesting asteroids in the outer belt, while Vex Processing Unit 12 Delta calculated optimal mining trajectories for both fleets. This is highly irregular, Riss transmitted to her fleet commanders. Standing orders require immediate engagement. Commander, replied her second-in-command, Captain Jern. Permission to speak freely? We've been asking ourselves the human question, why are we fighting? None of us have found a good answer. Throughout the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. Military commanders trained for centuries of warfare were discovering that their soldiers no longer wanted to fight without understanding the purpose. The human concept of questioning orders had spread like a virus through military hierarchies that had never experienced dissent. On Earth, the human coordination team was overwhelmed by requests for assistance. Every major species in the galaxy wanted advice on how to organize peace negotiations, how to build trust between enemies, and how to transition from warfare to cooperation. We need to systematize this, Dr. Chen announced to her expanded team, which now included diplomats, psychologists, economists, and even children like Emma Walsh, whose insights often proved more valuable than those of trained professionals. The good news is that everyone wants to stop fighting, reported Dr. Rodriguez. The bad news is that none of them know how. They've been at war so long that their entire civilizations are built around conflict. Emma raised her hand from her seat at the conference table. It's like when kids at school have been fighting for so long they forget what they were mad about. But they're afraid to stop because they think the other kid will make fun of them. Dr. Santos nodded seriously at the 8-year-old's analysis. That's actually a perfect summary of the strategic situation. Pride and fear of appearing weak are now the main obstacles to peace. The breakthrough came when Ambassador Yinris of the Thanari proposed something unprecedented, a galactic constitutional convention. Instead of trying to negotiate between the three great powers, representatives from every species would work together to create a new framework for interstellar civilization. The Thanari have been thinking about this for decades. Yinris explained via hologram to the human team. We believe the war continues because the galaxy lacks legitimate governance. The three powers rule through force, but no one consents to be ruled. Dr. Chen was fascinated by the concept. You're talking about democracy on a galactic scale. Has that ever been attempted? Never. Until now, it was impossible because no species trusted any other species to represent their interests fairly. But humans have demonstrated that cooperation is possible between very different types of consciousness. The proposal spread through the galaxy with unprecedented speed. Species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves working together to plan the greatest political gathering in galactic history. The location was chosen by unanimous vote: Earth itself. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The newest species in galactic politics would host the event that might end the oldest conflict. But first, the fighting had to actually stop. Across thousands of star systems, military commanders faced impossible decisions: continue following orders that no longer made sense, or risk court-martial by declaring unilateral ceasefires. The solution came from an unexpected source. General Thane, Swarm Voice Crix and Processing Unit 9 Alpha, still on Earth after weeks of studying human society, jointly transmitted a message to all military forces in the galaxy. Effective immediately, all offensive operations are suspended, pending evaluation of strategic objectives. Defensive positions may be maintained, but no advancement or aggressive action is authorized without direct approval from highest command authority. It wasn't technically a ceasefire, but it had the same effect. Within hours, the guns fell silent across the galaxy for the first time in 3,000 years. The silence was deafening. On Christos, Emperor Valdra stood in his throne room, listening to reports of the sudden quiet from every front. His military advisors were confused, asking for clarification of orders that had never needed clarification before. "Your Majesty," his chief advisor reported, "our forces are requesting permission to engage enemy targets, but the enemy forces are not advancing. Both sides are simply waiting." The Emperor looked out at the crystal spires of his capital city, built with resources extracted from conquered worlds, defended by weapons designed to kill alien species he had never bothered to understand. And what exactly are they waiting for? Permission to stop fighting, Your Majesty. On Nexus Prime, the Korthak hive mind was experiencing something it had never known: peace. Without the constant pressure of war, individual voices within the collective were becoming stronger, more distinct. The swarm was discovering that it could be both unified and diverse at the same time. On the VexCore worlds, processing units were running calculations that would have been considered heretical weeks earlier, projections for galactic civilization without war. The results were so positive that several units initially assumed their programming had been corrupted. Processing Unit 1 Prime transmitted to all Vex forces. Analysis complete. War is inefficient. Cooperation yields superior outcomes. Recommend immediate implementation of human cooperative protocols. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was happening among the smaller species. Free from the constant threat of being caught between the great powers, they were emerging from hiding places they had occupied for centuries. The Arans sent beautiful light patterns from their temporary homeworld, visible across multiple star systems, messages of hope and joy that could be read by any species with optical sensors. The Brux warriors put down their weapons for the first time in their recorded history and began teaching their children arts and crafts instead of combat techniques. The Thanari came out of deep space to share libraries of knowledge they had been protecting from destruction. On Earth, the human team was working frantically to prepare for the Constitutional Convention. Representatives from over 3,000 species had confirmed their attendance, making it the largest political gathering in galactic history. "We need ground rules," Dr. Chen announced. "Nobody has ever tried to run a meeting with 3,000 different species, all with different communication methods, different concepts of time, and different ideas about decision-making." Emma Walsh had been drawing pictures while the adults talked, and she held up her latest artwork, a simple diagram showing beings of all shapes and sizes sitting in a circle. "Like this," she said. "Everyone gets to talk, everyone has to listen, and nobody gets to be mean." Dr. Santos studied the child's drawing seriously. The circular arrangement would work. No head table, no hierarchy visible in the seating, everyone equal. Dr. Rodriguez was running economic models for post-war galactic civilization. The numbers are incredible. If we convert military spending to infrastructure development, We could connect every inhabited world in the galaxy within 50 years. The economic growth potential is astronomical. But the most important preparation was psychological. Humans had to figure out how to help 3,000 species learn to trust each other after millennia of conflict. We start with small successes, Dr. Chen explained to the team. Get them working together on simple problems first, build confidence in cooperation, then tackle the bigger issues. The first test came when a natural disaster struck a neutral world in the outer rim. A massive solar flare had destroyed the planet's orbital infrastructure, leaving millions of beings stranded without life support. The human team sent a simple message to all species. Who wants to help? The response was overwhelming. Zalathi ships arrived with crystalline repair modules. Korthak bioships provided emergency food supplies. Vex units calculated optimal rescue patterns. Dozens of smaller species contributed whatever they could. Within days, former enemies were working side by side to save lives. Engineers who had spent careers designing weapons found themselves collaborating on life support systems. Warriors who had killed each other's people were sharing technical knowledge to repair damaged stations. The rescue operation was a complete success, but more importantly, it proved that galactic cooperation was possible. As rescue ships returned to their home systems, they carried more than just saved refugees. They carried the knowledge that former enemies could work together, that trust could be built, and that the future could be different from the past. The cosmic war had ended not with a great battle or a treaty signing, but with a simple question and the gradual realization that fighting wasn't necessary anymore. As representatives began arriving on Earth for the Constitutional Convention, the galaxy held its breath. 3,000 species were about to attempt something that had never been done before, building a civilization based on cooperation instead of conquest. And at the center of it all, humans were doing what they had always done best, helping others. Discover that impossible things were only impossible until someone figured out how to make them work. The Constitutional Convention of Earth began on a Tuesday morning in what humans called spring. Representatives from 3,000 species gathered in the largest structure ever built by human hands, a circular amphitheater constructed specifically for the occasion in the Sahara Desert. Its dome opened to the sky so that beings who required different atmospheric conditions could attend. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the center of the Great Circle, looking up at the most diverse gathering in galactic history. Crystalline Zalathi reflected the morning sunlight like living prisms. Massive Korthak bioforms pulsed with organic rhythms. Mechanical Vex units calculated and processed with quiet efficiency. Between them sat thousands of other species. The butterfly-like Erins glowing with soft light. The wise four-brained Thanari. The warrior Brucks who had learned to make art instead of war. We gather today, Dr. Chen began, her words translated into thousands of languages simultaneously, not as conquerors or conquered, not as masters or servants, but as equals seeking a common future. Emperor Valdris of the Zalathi spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of millennia of tradition. The Zalathi Empire formally renounces all claims to superiority over other species. We offer our knowledge and strength to serve the common good. The words sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. The oldest and most powerful empire in the galaxy had just voluntarily abandoned the philosophy that had driven it for thousands of years. The Korthak response came from thousands of voices speaking in unison, but each voice was subtly different. The hive mind had learned to embrace individual variation while maintaining collective harmony. The swarm chooses cooperation over consumption. We offer our biological diversity and adaptive capabilities to strengthen galactic unity. Processing Unit 1. Prime of the Vex spoke with mechanical precision, but its words carried emotional weight that would have been impossible before human contact. The collective calculates that diversity increases systemic efficiency. We offer our computational resources and logical analysis to optimize galactic cooperation. One by one, species that had been enemies for centuries stood and made similar declarations. The Erins offered to share their mastery of energy manipulation. The Brucks pledged their strength to protect the weak rather than conquer them. The Thanari volunteered their accumulated wisdom to guide the new civilization. But it was Emma Walsh who asked the question that defined everything that followed. What kind of galaxy do we want to build together? The answer came not from the great powers but from the smallest voices. A young Aaron, barely old enough to maintain stable light form, spoke about wanting to see the homeworlds of other species. A Brux child demonstrated a sculpture he had made, explaining that he wanted to be an artist instead of a warrior. A newly awakened individual consciousness within the Korthak swarm expressed curiosity about music and poetry. Dr. Rodriguez presented the economic framework that would make it all possible. Instead of spending 60% of galactic resources on weapons and warfare, we propose redirecting those resources to education, exploration, and infrastructure. The economic models show that every species will be better off within a generation. The proposal wasn't just theoretical. Humans had prepared detailed plans for converting military technology to peaceful purposes. Weapons factories could become medical research centers. Warships could be transformed into exploration vessels. Military training centers could become universities. Dr. Santos explained the technical challenges. We'll need to build communication networks that can handle thousands of different languages and thought patterns. We'll need transportation systems that can accommodate every type of biological and mechanical life. We'll need governing structures that respect the autonomy of each species while enabling collective action. The solutions came from the delegates themselves. The Vex offered to design translation matrices that could handle any form of communication. The Korthak volunteered to develop bioships that could transport any type of being safely. The Zalathi proposed using their phase-shifting technology to create meeting spaces that could accommodate multiple environmental requirements simultaneously. But the most important, work was being done in small groups scattered throughout the amphitheater. Former enemies were sharing meals, exchanging cultural artifacts, and discovering that beings they had fought for centuries were remarkably similar to themselves. General Thane found himself in conversation with a Korthak swarm voice about crystalline architecture. They discovered that both their species created structures that were part art, part engineering, and entirely beautiful. Within hours, they were sketching plans for hybrid buildings that combined crystal and bioorganic design. Processing Unit 9 Alpha was analyzing air and light poetry with growing fascination. The mathematical patterns underlying their artistic expressions were more complex than any Vex computational matrix, yet they served no logical purpose except beauty. For the first time in its existence, 9 Alpha understood the concept of creating something simply because it was beautiful. Young beings from different species were forming friendships that would last centuries. Children who would grow up in a galaxy without war were already building the relationships that would make peace permanent. The constitutional framework that emerged from 6 weeks of discussion was unlike anything that had ever existed. Instead of a central government ruling over subject populations, it was a confederation of autonomous species working together on shared projects. Each species would govern itself according to its own traditions and values. But they would also participate in galactic councils that coordinated exploration, shared resources, and resolved conflicts through mediation rather than warfare. The humans proposed a simple principle that became the foundation of the new order. The strength of the galaxy comes from the diversity of its peoples, and the security of each species depends on the prosperity of all species. Ambassador Yinris of the Thanari formally proposed the amendment that sealed the agreement. Be it resolved that war between intelligent species is hereby declared obsolete, inefficient, and contrary to the interests of galactic civilization. The vote was unanimous. As delegates prepared to return to their home worlds to ratify the new galactic constitution, they carried with them something more valuable than any treaty: the knowledge that cooperation was possible, that enemies could become friends, and that the future could be whatever they chose to make it. Dr. Chen stood in the empty amphitheater as the last delegates departed, looking up at the star-filled sky. Her team gathered around her, exhausted but amazed by what they had accomplished. "So what happens now?" asked Dr. Santos. Emma Walsh, now 9 years old and considered by many to be the wisest human alive, answered with the confidence that only children possess. "Now we build the most amazing galaxy ever, and we all get to help." Dr. Rodriguez was already running projections on his tablet. The first joint exploration missions launch in 6 months. We'll have delegations from 50 species working together to map the galactic core. In 2 years, we'll open the first interspecies universities. In 5 years, every inhabited world will be connected by the new communication network. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was already beginning. Children across the galaxy were learning about other species not as enemies to be feared, but as friends to be discovered. The generation growing up in the post-war galaxy would be the first in galactic history to consider diversity normal and cooperation natural. On Christos, young Zalathi were studying Korthak biology alongside their traditional crystal cultivation. On Nexus Prime, individual voices within the swarm were composing original poetry and sharing it with off-world pen pals. On the Vex core worlds, processing units were experimenting with irrational pursuits like gardening and music composition. The cosmic war was over, ended not by victory or defeat but by the simple realization that it didn't have to continue. 3,000 years of conflict had been replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history: hope for a better future. And at the center of it all, on a small blue planet in an unremarkable star system, humans continued to do what they did best, proving that impossible things were only impossible until someone figured out how to make them work. The galaxy had learned what happened when an ancient war met a species that didn't believe in permanent enemies. It had learned that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't technology or strength or logic, but simply the willingness to ask a better question and the courage to believe that change was possible. The cosmic war had ended the moment humanity appeared, not because humans were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because they had brought something the galaxy had forgotten was possible: the simple faith that tomorrow could be better than today. As Earth's sun set on the empty amphitheater, delegates across the galaxy were already beginning the work of building the future they had chosen together. The age of war was ending. The age of cooperation had begun, and somewhere in the vast reaches of space, other species not yet discovered by galactic civilization would eventually receive humanity's original message. Greetings from the children of Earth.